If you just took a glance at Vintage Story, you probably would think it's just a shitty Minecraft ripoff, but you'd be completely wrong. Vintage Story amps up the survival elements to the extreme, and slows down the pace of play significantly compared to Minecraft. For example, to get your first tools, you have to knap two stones together and pick some sticks up off the ground. Among your first tools will be a spear, which is used to carefully hunt animals to get a few scraps of meat to eat. Meat which will spoil in just a few days if you don't cook it and store it somewhere out of the sun, ideally in a cellar. In the early game, getting building blocks beyond just dirt is rather difficult. You won't be able to create wooden planks until you've entered the Copper Age, which requires you to find clay and form clay molds and then fire them in pit kilns. Next, you'll need to find copper nuggets, either from the ground or from panning some gravel. And then you can smelt and pour the copper into the molds you fired and finally get some tools. But that still won't enable you to get the saw which is required for those planks. That necessitates getting a copper anvil, which means you'll need a whole lot more copper and to pour that copper into an anvil mold. Finally, you can heat up a cold ingot on a forge and use a hammer to shape it into a saw. Then, and only then, can you get some planks to build your first half-decent structure out of. And the single best part about the game is how it encourages you to build various structures. You'll want to build a house to protect yourself from monsters and from the elements, but you'll also want to build a cellar to preserve food, a blacksmith building to hold your molds and firewood, a barn for animals and a flower field for bees, along with a greenhouse to allow you to grow crops for a larger portion of the year. You can even create a windmill to automate mechanical tasks. The goal of creating those buildings gives real purpose to what you're doing. You want to spend the time gathering the resources to build something because the building will give you a significant return on investment in its use, not just in its aesthetic appeal. There are so many different ways to progress, which gives you genuine options in what the next best course of action is. Do you want to go mining to get the next tier of tools? Or make a bee farm to make the best permanent light source in lanterns and preserve your food with wax? Or you could set up a garden to grow crops. Or would you rather make a cellar to make your food last longer? Or start to tame your own chickens or goats? Or you could go hunting to get some protein and leather to make armor and backpacks that increase your inventory size. Or you could make a windmill to automate pulverizing materials, and a hellhammer to help with smithing. All of those tasks provide meaningful progress, and it's up to you to decide what order you tackle those goals in, or if you tackle them at all. It feels like just about every system in the game has more depth attached to it than you would expect. The prospecting system, for example, is excellent. You have to locate large veins of ore by testing the stone to see what reading you get, and testing in every direction around that reading to find the center of the vein, so that you know you can find the vein when you dig down. Different ores also spawn in different types of rocks, and there are multiple rock layers in the ground, so as you learn what ores can spawn in what rocks, you can more easily pinpoint them. And I really like that the size of veins varies so much, both in quality of the ore and the size and density of the vein. It feels like gambling when you find a vein and you're wondering how good all three of those factors will be, and when you hit it big and get more stacks of ore than you know what to do with, it feels amazing. Knapping, creating pottery, and smithing are all super fun. This is the kind of crafting I wish more games had. Instead of just engaging with the UI, you physically form the items you want to create, which makes you have a stronger connection to the items you create while being significantly more engaging. And you can learn little tricks to become faster at creating those items, which feels super satisfying. The food group system is also really cool. Balancing your diet from all 5 groups increases your max health, which is a great reward, but doesn't force the system upon you. The cooking system is also very good. You can create various types of meals, which increase the amount of hunger you'll get from each piece of food, and can be stored for longer periods of time. You can bake bread, pies, make alcohol, cook stews and porridges. There's quite a few options. And in all of these tasks, the handbook is an absolute godsend. It has basically all the information you could ever want about the game available in it, so you don't need to check a wiki constantly. You can read up on the requirements to create a greenhouse, or a cementation furnace to create steel, along with seeing every crafting recipe available in the game, and everything in between. On the not so good side is how you need specific types of stones to do specific things, like limestone, chalk, or marble to create leather. Sometimes you have to travel thousands of blocks for a different colored rock. The problem is somewhat mitigated by borax being a substitute, but if you aren't lucky, finding borax while prospecting can be just as difficult. Gating leather behind that feels so bad, because leather is so important for upgrading your limited inventory slots. You start with legitimately zero inventory, and have to create baskets out of cattails to hold some items, and you can upgrade both your personal inventory and your long-term storage as you progress throughout the game, which feel like massive upgrades when you get them. The easiest way to fix the issues with finding limestone is to decrease the size of stone biomes. If stone biomes were reduced to like a quarter of the size, you could see so many more types of stone in the same distance, and finding lime wouldn't be such an issue. That would also increase the varieties of stone you can build with, which I think would be a great thing. I also think that the default setting for a length of a year should be shortened significantly. This would give you less time to prepare for winter, but also make it shorter. But frankly, I don't really care about that. The main issue with the current length is it takes about 80 hours to complete a full year if you don't sleep. I think it would be way more fun to experience 2 to 3 years in that time. As it is, depending on how fast you are and how much you build, you can easily get through 90% of the content in a year. I was surprised to find out there's an actual story in the game. There are a couple major locations in the story, the first being the Resonance Archives, which by default spawns about 5,000 blocks away from spawn. The archives are really fun to explore, and give some pretty good rewards and the ability to craft a glider and to purchase an elk. However, the story content beyond that is straight up not worth your time. The rest of the content is so far away, and there's so little to do when you get there. When you get to the Lazaret, which is about 12,000 blocks away, there's legitimately 5 minutes of content. The village it sends you to next is cool, but all there is to do there is talk to a handful of NPCs, and the village is another 12,000 blocks away. Then you're told to travel another 7,000 blocks to get to the Devastation, which is somewhat interesting. It has a large tower that you have to climb, and you randomly get the ability to travel to an earlier point in time when the tower isn't destroyed, which is required to do some parkour to get to the top of the tower. This section was super mediocre, and the boss fight at the top is fine, but it takes a long time and isn't very challenging. After the fight, you'll have to travel to Tobias's cave, which is a few thousand blocks away from the village, which likely means about 10,000 blocks away from the Desolation. This is currently where the story content ends, but I'm sure more will be added in future updates as the game is still in early access. The elk does improve the trips to these locations, but frankly, the ratio of time spent traveling versus doing the actual story content is just ridiculous. This of course can be changed in the generation settings under the story structure distance scaling. Vintage Story is a little weird to critique in that way, and that a lot of my criticisms can be mitigated if you alter the default settings, but you won't know to change them until after you've played the game at least once, so it's still vital that the defaults are set correctly. The elk also has a few problems. Firstly, it loses some of its speed for every single block it has to go up, which is just insane. Terrain is rarely flat, and stuttering a little bit every time you go up a single block sucks. But the worst part is when you take the elk through a forest. The elk will get stuck on every single branchy leaf, and it makes it miserable to try to find a path through. On the bright side of the elk, they are incredibly fully featured, and you can kit them out with so many accessories to make them more useful and to fit your aesthetic. And having extra storage and faster travel speed is super nice for long journeys. I adore this game. I have some issues with it, sure, but if you're the right kind of player, Vintage Story is incredibly addicting and enjoyable. It can be so peaceful, almost meditative, to work on expanding your homestead while cheery music plays. More than once, I just couldn't help but grin when the music kicked in during a sunrise while I was building. Vintage Story brings back so much nostalgia for me of being a kid and playing Minecraft, where progress felt well earned and the possibilities felt endless. If what I've said has intrigued you, I highly recommend giving Vintage Story a try. It's an incredibly special game, and one that I'm sure I will continue to come back to as more updates are added.